Hey everybody, it's Extra Rounds from UFC Fight Pass. I'm TJ DeSantis. Please be joined now for the second time in our show's history by NASCAR driver Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He is back in action coming up Sunday in Daytona. It is the Daytona 500. Ricky, it's the race that sort of signifies that everything has come full circle. The offseason is officially in the rear view, and you really get to start things with one of the biggest races of them all in Daytona. You got to be pretty excited to get back to the proverbial office, if you will, and get back in the swing of things, right?
I'm excited. Obviously, we got a little dose of it this past weekend at the Clash, and it is what it is. It's an exhibition race. It can go good or it can go bad or kind of somewhere in the middle. I would say ours kind of went somewhere in the middle, but yeah, for sure. I mean, we're always, once you get to Daytona, we got qualifying Wednesday, we got media day kind of Wednesday afternoon, and that's kind of like the first day of school. I feel like, the Clash, like I said, is exhibition race, a week off, and then school really starts and our season gets going. So we're pumped. We've had a lot of work this off season. We got the Kroger Cottonelle car, getting ready to go down to the Daytona 500. The guys are massaging on it, making sure everything's right, throughout this next week and a half before we head down to Daytona.
One thing that has always sort of intrigued me about really any sport, whether it's, auto racing or mixed martial arts or, the finer points of golf or baseball, is the technique and the science behind everything. And what you guys are doing, on the track, there's a whole other, science to it, because there's that human element, but there's also, the machine element. And I'm curious, like, how much of the minutia of like what the pit crew is doing and your team, what they do to the car, do you sort of intimately get involved with, or do you just step back and watch them do their thing?
A little bit of both. I'm not an engineer,
Right.
but I have been driving race cars my whole life, and so I pay attention. I've worked on my dirt cars growing up. I don't obviously work on my cup cars because they have people to do that. So
Right.
I lend my expertise as far as like I'll go in the shop and hang out with the engineers, hang out with the crew guys. But when I'm sitting there talking about crew chief or talking to the engineers, we're just going over races that are coming up, and
Yeah.
obviously we'll go once the season starts, we'll go over the races that happen prior. And so we have simulator time. I sit there and dissect the car. I dissect the changes that we made to our race car throughout either that given weekend or throughout the simulator session, and we just debrief and just talk about each change. And the engineers are always trying to come up with a better setup. I mean,
Right.
that's all there is to it, right? I mean, you try and come up with your best setup. The problem is they go, all week long and put their best setup that they feel possible that they can come up with in the race car. And then we practice on Saturday for 20 minutes,
Right.
and then we qualify, and then we race. And so you have 20 minutes to make a few adjustments, but it's kind of tough because it's like I used all my time during the week to come up with our best setup. And now I'm, as a driver, I'm trying to, pick it apart and make it better for Sunday on the race. And so I've got to be conscious of, kind of what changes have done what in the past, whether it be an air pressure adjustment or, a wedge adjustment, changing springs around, different rod heights. And so I kind of keep a mental note of, what each change does
Hmm.
throughout a given weekend and throughout the year. And so, when we go to a racetrack that's, a flat racetrack, and then we go to another short track that's similar, I can kind of go back and be like, all right, the car was doing this when we were at Phoenix. We made this change and it made it better. Let's, so I'll kind of push them in that direction. And
Right.
so you definitely become one with, each other and then one with the car. And then, like you said, there's always something changing. We got our pit crew guys. When you come in for a pit stop that, I mean, it's timed, right? Like the faster you do it, the better you are, the more positions you'll gain. And then, then the elements of the racetrack changing. Sun changes the temperature of the racetrack. The temperature of the racetrack changes how your car handles and the air pressure in the tires. And, just there's so many parts and pieces that go along with, NASCAR racing. It takes a full team effort, and everybody's got to be on the same page and kind of like holding hands together.
Right.
If somebody makes a mistake, you can't put fingers because that's just one little piece of it.
Right.
And, they may do that piece right 90% of the time. And then like I might mess up. Right. So there's a lot to it, a lot
Y-
to it.
looking at your history, like you were racing karts when you were like single digits in age, and everything I assumed, like any other sport, it's a journey, right? So you're harkening back to those old things that you build instincts for, and obviously racing in the Daytona 500 is a lot different than say the dirt track back in the day when you were 6 years old. But I'm curious, like, do you have instincts that you feel like you developed at that young age that are still helping you today?
100%. And I would say I credit a lot of that to my dad. My dad raced, so I just grew up in racing, and I felt like I got in a go-kart at 5 years old. I was watching my dad basically from now, I mean, obviously I didn't remember, but from like 6 weeks old till I was five
Right.
years old till I got in a race car. And before we ever went to one race, my dad, this racetrack had like practice nights each week. And so one week we went and practiced, and my dad was like, all right, I'm going to set up the go-kart, and it's going to feel like this. This is what you're going to struggle with. That's called, being tight. The car won't turn.
Right.
That's an issue. You want it to be better. The next week we kind of went back, and he's like, all right, it's going to be super loose. The cart's going to want to spin out. When you go through the corner at a high speed, it's going to want to get loose and spin out. That's being too loose. And then the third week we went, and he's like, all right, I'm going to try and get this thing, where it's kind of neutral in the middle. Like that's where you want to be, and that's how you want it to drive. And so I feel like I learned that at like 5 years old, and then obviously it's grown ever since. Of, anytime you're in a race car, you're learning. So
Yeah.
the last week of this off season, I went and raced a dirt car with my dad, and and I feel like I'm still learning. I mean, every time you get in a race car, if you're not open minded enough to learn, then you're kind of not moving forward, right? So just because somebody is an expert at something, there's always something to learn.
Right. Yeah. I love that story because not everyone has those experiences. I got a go kart when I was like 6. My dad tried to get it to work, drove it down the block one time, throttle got stuck, crashed into a tree. You never got into another
I've
vehicle
heard
again.
stories like that a lot. I've heard it. It's your dad or family buys you like a yard cart, and you're out
Right.
pumped to go out there, and it's probably not put together perfectly, right? My dad built race engines for a living and worked
Yeah.
on race cars, so
Yeah.
like he knew how everything went together perfectly, right?
Right.
And I hear so many stories about kids getting in go-karts when they were younger and the throttle sticking, or on a dirt bike and the throttle sticking.
Yeah.
So that's a story that goes with a lot of people I've heard.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like my mom won the argument, right? Like my dad's like, no, we'll just fix it. But my mom's like, you almost killed my baby.
Shut it
Never
down.
happening again, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm curious, getting back to sort of the comparisons between what you do and then what our athletes do in the octagon. There's the old adage in combat sports that styles make fights, and I think styles make races as well. Like we were just talking about the Clash, the Coliseum, a flat track, very short. Daytona 500, it's a super speedway. Like, I mean, when I play the video game, Ricky, I'm not even touching the brake when I'm racing at Daytona. Like, what is it like to go from a small track to just this massive sort of open throttle type of affair? Because your mindset and your adaptability must really have to be open minded, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it spot on. I mean, you can go to Daytona, I mean, for the most part, and never touch the brake pedal. When we're racing, there's definitely, a lot of times that, when we're in the draft, that we got to make a decision whether we lift a little bit or we stay wide open, we drag a little bit of brake. There's different techniques, and that's at every racetrack. You go from the Clash, like you said, where we're in the brakes just as much as we're in the gas. And, you go to Daytona, you're definitely in the throttle wide open a lot more than you're in the brakes. And then, I would say each driver, we all have different personalities. We all have different characteristics, and you got to know which drivers tend to do what.
Right.
And so you're, at Daytona, Talladega, you're drafting, you're up front, you're always, close to somebody, and you got somebody either behind you, in front of you. And again, all those mental notes that I take of the car, you also take mental notes of, what drivers do. And I'll go back and watch races and kind of, especially for Daytona and Talladega, what moves did guys make, towards the end of the race,
Yeah.
or, what's the tendencies of this guy. So similar to a UFC fight, right? Like when somebody is training for a fight against somebody, they're watching film, or at least their corner's watching film, and going to tell you exactly kind of what that other fighter's instincts are. And so when we get out there and you're coming down to 5 laps to go at Daytona and you're at the front, you got to kind of expect and almost predict what somebody else is going to do around you. For one, so you can either block them
Right.
and keep them behind you, or if you're behind them, you're trying to obviously advance and make a position. So whether you're on offense or defense, you always got to know your opponent. You got to know the racetrack. Definitely a lot goes into each given weekend.
Last time we had you on the show, we were talking about your relationship with Donald Cowboy Cerrone, who, is an adrenaline junkie, a guy that, he's always, heavy on the pedal in life when it comes to, searching for adrenaline and things like that. It looks like he's pretty much done, being an active fighter. He's massive. I don't even know if he would fit in a NASCAR right now. Like he is huge. What do you think about Donald Cerrone? Like, would he make a good race car driver?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I would say obviously he's got his acting career going right now. I feel like
Right.
that's probably more important for him
Right.
right now. But I think yes, on the part of like, if he was out there by himself, like, could he go fast and like get the most out of the car? Eventually, over time, I feel like he could. But the few times that him and I talked about racing, all he wanted to do is, just go out and like crash somebody. So I don't think that would go over well.
Yeah.
And I think he would lose his temper a little too much.
Right. Yeah. Well, we know he'd win the fight if
But
there was some road rage involved, at least.
Yes, for sure. But his off-road stuff, I feel like, is perfect for him.
Right.
I mean, you're on the gas in those side by sides, wide open. Just that's adrenaline for sure.
Right.
All
Yeah.
adrenaline.
I mean, that's like the old analogy in like mixed martial arts when you just want to stand and trade. Like that's off-road racing, I think. It's brawl and brawl type
Exactly.
racing.
Toe to
Yeah.
toe and just see who lasts.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you're the one lasting at the end of the Daytona 500. Again, it's February 19th. Ricky, appreciate the time. Best of luck this season. And, maybe we'll have you back, check in and see how things are going midway through.
Heck yeah, let's do it. I feel really good about the season. We've made a lot of good changes this offseason. The shop guys have been pumped up this offseason. We've kind of got the old band back together. My crew chief from when I won, Nationwide Series championships is back to calling the shots for me. So a lot of exciting things. And yeah, Daytona 500 coming up soon.